Okay, so this will be the video recording for Plants as Food and Spice, or Plants as Food. Once again, you will find a PDF with kind of a short summary of some of these in little text boxes on the slide. So whichever way you guys prefer to watch these is fine. This is pretty much chapter, I believe it's 15 in the textbook, but you don't have to have the textbook to follow along. Just note that most of the pictures are from that. So we pretty much can't live at all without plants as a food source. Imagine our life without plants. We couldn't feed ourselves. We couldn't feed the animals that feed us. So pretty much all life is made possible by plants. We use them for all kinds of different things beyond that, but the reality is life is only possible because plants are a food source. The challenge we have is roughly 60% of our calories comes from only 3 crops: wheat, rice, and corn. 85% of the rest comes from about 20 different plants. So as a species, we don't really eat many plants. 500,000 plants in the entire world, and we eat about 23 of them. That's about it. So yes, some cultures eat a little bit more. There are different plants for different cultures, but the reality is most cultures only eat about 20 to 25 different plants total. There it is. So I was a little off there. 35 plants total, right? Roughly 15 of those are vegetables, 15 are the fruits. Around the world, about 94% of our total caloric intake actually comes from plant products, and 6% comes from animal products. So as a general society, world society, most human beings are closer to being vegetarians than they are omnivores. These are the top 20 crops in the U.S. Notice that almost all of them are food crops, with the exception of cotton. That's why cotton has the asterisk, because it's one of the major crops that is not a food crop. We eat all kinds of different plants. I am not going to ask you to remember which plant parts we eat, with carrots and tomatoes and and potatoes and all those different things. But just as we go through this, take a note and look at the fact that when it comes to across the world of plants, we eat all kinds of different things: the seeds, the leaves, the roots, the stems, the flowers. So we eat lots and lots of different plant parts. Not all of any one individual plant, but across the whole of plants, we eat lots of parts. So if you look at the top, grasses, sugarcane is number 1, corn is number 2. But those grasses do comprise a good bulk of our food crops in general. The number 1 tuber that we eat are potatoes, and that's just the regular potato, not a sweet potato, which is a little bit different. And I know that in our culture we call yams sweet potatoes, and we use those interchangeably, but they're actually not. A true yam comes from a palm tree and not a potato. We eat a lot of fruit. Yeah, we use tomato as a vegetable, but technically it's a fruit. Bananas, grapes, oranges, apples. So fruits are pretty easy, usually easy for us to name. And again, this is kind of going back to what I said a minute ago. When it comes to what parts of the plant do we eat, pick a plant part. Chances are there is a plant that we eat that part. So we may not eat the entire carrot plant, but we do eat roots. We may not eat every plant's seeds, but we do eat seeds. So that's what we're looking at, is across the span of all the plants that we eat basically every single part of a plant. We kind of talked about this a little bit, so this is a bit of a review here. We know we domesticated plants about 10,000 years ago, and modern crops appeared between 2 and 9,000 years ago. And of course, within the last few hundred years, and definitely in the last few decades, we've been doing breeding programs and genetic engineering that enable us to change things, maybe not increasing the yield for an individual plant, but decreasing competition, for example, with Roundup Ready products, or BT corn, eliminating the loss from a pest. So that would increase yield, even though it doesn't necessarily increase it for that individual plant. This is an interesting little article here, and we can click on this article. And this is an article about what plants used to look like. So this is what a wild banana looks like. You'll notice that there's not a lot of fruit, and there's an awful lot of seeds in there. Right? So we don't have any looks at wild watermelons, but here's a painting from the 17th century. So you're looking at somewhere between 1645 and 1672 is what that painting was made. And that's what watermelon used to look like. Somebody looked at that and went, I can work with that. I'm going to eat that. Versus a modern watermelon today with no seeds. We've talked about wild bananas, and there's a modern banana. You can see the places where the seeds are supposed to be, but there actually aren't any seeds in there. That is an eggplant. Somebody took a look at that and went, I can work with that. Right? And yeah, there's lots and lots of different types of eggplants, but that's a modern eggplant nowadays. Right? It's lots of flesh on it, completely different color. They don't have the thorns on them, so it's completely different than the original eggplant. That's a wild carrot. That is now what we have as carrots nowadays. And we've talked about corn, so I don't want to go into corn a whole lot, but you've seen the difference. There's peaches, wild peach, and modern peaches. So it doesn't really matter which plant you're talking about. Every single one of them has gone through changes, whether that's breeding changes or engineering changes. There's lots of arguments about what we ate before. One of the things that people claimed recently that people ate was the whole paleo diet, which is going to be lots of meat, seeds, lots of vegetables, and very limited carbs. Right? Some fruits, nuts, good carbs, and lots of lean meat. That's what our ancestors ate. So we need to eat like our ancestors. This particular link, I'm not going to have you watch the whole link. You can go and click it. It's a TED Talk that goes through what paleo people ate. For those of you with limited time or limited broadband or access to broadband, the basic thing that comes down to is paleo people ate what they could get their hands on. And what they could get their hands on depended upon where they lived. So somebody who lived closer to the ocean would eat a lot more fish. Somebody who lived on a savanna grasslands would perhaps eat a lot more grasses. And maybe they would get some meat every once in a while because they were hunting something. So it completely changes how you might look at the quote-unquote paleo diet. Think about why we eat, not just the calories. Of course we eat to stay alive. But think about all the rituals that we have around food. And we eat when we get bored. We eat for celebration. We have holidays based around it, right? And many of those calories can come from plants. We can actually get all of our caloric and protein needs from plants if we carefully select the plants that we eat. I'm not saying to do that. I'm saying it's possible to do that. And then how do we make food even better? I mean, corn is good, but what do we do to make it better? We put salt on it, right? Those are herbs and spices. They change the flavor. They increase our enjoyment. They make things interesting. They are things that we don't need in a whole lot of amounts. But the plant, just like medicines, the plant doesn't make those flavorings for its enjoyment or even for our enjoyment. We might change and breed the flavorings for our enjoyment, but the plant puts it out there to prevent other things from eating it. And again, you don't need to know which ones of these are which. Just be aware that all of these different types of chemicals are different things. So when you smell a citrus, and a conifer, those are things that we smell easily, versus thyme or oregano, versus pepper and cloves. So you can kind of group all of those into the different types of scents and flavors. These are the 5 basic flavors that we can taste: sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and savory. And then think about how smell adds to that. If you get a cold, does your food taste as good? If you hold your nose and eat a strawberry, does it taste the same as if you don't hold your nose? These are things you can try on your own if you'd like. So we take a look at some of the plants in the mint family in particular that we use. So on the left, you've got rosemary. On the right is actually a basil leaf. And what I want you to notice with the basil is you can see all those little holes. So you can see all these little holes right here. Those are actually the glands where basil holds the oils that we use for flavoring. And a lot of plants have those. You just can't necessarily see them easily. Things like celery, we are actually eating the petioles. So this is a petiole of a plant. Petiole is what holds the leaf to a plant. These parts are the leaves. We tend to throw those away, and then we eat the stem, basically. So take a look at the different things that we eat and where the flavoring has come from. And if you were to do a botanical analysis of those, you would find out that most of these plants would have little cells in them, little glands, holding the oils that are what we like to flavor with. On the right is a mustard field, so you can see mustard growing. On the left are peppers. And we use all kinds of different peppers, all kinds of different mustards. There's hundreds of each of one of these. Some of them nowadays are actually grown for ornamentals in addition to being edible. So here's an example of that with peppers. All three of these peppers are not grown for being edible. They are all edible because they're peppers. Some of them are hot, some of them are not hot. And because they're not grown specifically for the flavoring, you absolutely have no way of knowing what you're going to get. So I'll give you an example. I one time had one of these red peppers that are there on the purple leaves, and it was so hot I threw up. But these guys over here, they're called chili chili. They're not so hot. So it really completely depends on the ornamental pepper because they're grown for being looked at and not for, not for their edibility. This is what ginger looks like. If you've ever had ginger in any of your recipes, this is what ginger looks like. This down here, the root part, is what we eat, but over on the left you can see what the plant itself looks like. The only orchid that we eat is vanilla. And there's vanilla. I took this picture at the National Botanic Garden, and this is vanilla climbing on one of the walls. It is an orchid, and it's the only orchid that we use for any flavoring. So again, the point here is to note that for all kinds of different flavorings, plants, we eat lots and lots and lots of different parts. If you include the number of herbs and spices, we eat hundreds of plants. If you simply look at the bulk of where our calories are coming from, we eat very few plants. And the thing to think about here is what happens if one of those plants has a problem? What happens to the world's food supply if one of those plants has a problem? All right, as always, if you got any questions, get in touch. And